Hi, I'm Lindsay Shepherd. I'm the president of the Laurier Society for Open Inquiry. Welcome to our first event. We're doing a screening of TV Ontario's The Agenda with Steve Paikin, an episode called Genders, Rights, and Freedom of Speech. Enjoy.
I think we'll get the show on the road here. Thank you all for showing up. I think we got a good turnout for our first event, and also for a club that's obviously not officially registered with the university. You know, we couldn't put up posters or nothing, but we still got you all out here. So thanks for coming. Thank you so much. Now, obviously, we are the Laurier Society for Open Inquiry, known as LSOI in short. That's what it's going to be referred to thereafter. And first of all, I'd like to make sure we all are on the same page in terms of the rules. Now, it's a free speech club, so you can, well, say pretty much anything you want. We just ask that you're respectful and that you don't attack people. That being said, each one of us here can handle some heckling or booing, unlike some people out there. I'd like to introduce our wonderful members, the team that put this all together. And our first introduction is Nathaniel over here. This is Nathaniel. He is graduate studies of the seminary. Then we have Adrienne, second year poli-sci here at Laurier as well. We got the guy who does the least work but has a loud voice, so I guess I'm useful. Anton, I'm in second year poli-sci. And a girl some of you might know, she's been called a dangerous person, a tough cookie. She's the producer of White Woman Tears, Lindsay Shepherd. I think she has some remarks for you, so Lindsay, go ahead.
They're not lengthy remarks, but there was something really important that actually came out just this morning. So let me play that. So just today, actually, the Economist Intelligence Unit came out with the Democracy Index 2017, Free Speech Under Attack. And there was a section called Freedom of Expression is under threat from those who claim the right not to be offended. I'm going to read what I find to be the most salient part of that. A growing body of opinion thinks that people in groups have a right not to be offended, and this is leading to the intrusive policing of social media to eradicate hate speech and silence and even prosecute offenders. As being offended is such a subjective thing, handing the power to somebody to police it can result in the arbitrary and extensive exercise of censorship. The idea that some speech harms the listener has led to the creation of safe spaces on university campuses in the US and the UK, into which students who do not wish to be exposed to words and ideas they do not like can retreat. In this report, Canada is still listed as the 6th best democracy, but they do say that it's very alarming, the trend that we're going with censorship on university campuses, and it's really something to look out for. It's, you know, there definitely is a trend of authoritarianism, and that brings us to the philosophy of LSOI. We're not only about freedom of expression, we're also about open inquiry, hence the name Laurier Society for Open Inquiry. And so we want to do 3 things. So the first is very simple. It's exploring issues. In keeping with the values of free speech and open inquiry, we want to be able to engage with current societal topics and not be afraid that someone is going to be offended by it. And we want to be able to engage in an intellectual and productive and critical way. The second is offering alternatives to the dominant narrative. So here I have a sample of the kinds of events that Laurier puts on. And if you're affiliated with any kind of university, you'll be familiar that these are the kind of events that are put on. They're usually affiliated with identity politics, activism related to race, gender, and sexuality. And that's great. And I've attended events like this, and I don't want to diminish the work that they do. But that being said, LSOI wants to put on events that wouldn't necessarily fit into that narrative of social justice, but still speak to humanity, right? And the third thing is building community. And I'm aware that this sounds kind of like a filler phrase or kind of like an empty sentence, but we actually mean it. We know that there are people out there who are worried about the way things are going in workplaces and on campuses, and there's other people who are unhappy with the state of things as well. So, we're here for support and we're here for advice. And I know that personally, I really fear a society where we can't be honest and we can't be open with each other. And I find it sad that we would reach a state in society where we can't just be real in our conversations with each other. We can't be real. And so fundamentally, that's why I'm dedicated to this mission of protecting freedom of expression. So, with that said, Nathaniel will talk a little bit about membership.
So just a little bit of housekeeping. Nothing nearly as riveting as you just heard, or anything that will follow. This is our first event, as you know, and the turnout is obviously fantastic. But we would like to start this as a foundation for future events. At the end, after we're done the open discussion, after seeing the video, we'll have membership slips here that you can fill out, and it's a $10 fee, and this gives you 12-month access to all the events that will follow. We're looking to set up panel discussions, debate series. We're even looking to bring in Jordan Peterson onto campus. So you won't have to pay anything to access those events, regardless of what the cost is for each particular event. All right, so make sure you come by afterward and you fill those out, and be all set.
All right, thank you, Nate. So I guess come get our memberships, and you get a nice card, and you go to the wallet, and that's fun.
So, without any further talking or ado, we're going to show the video that kind of caused this all to happen. Now, I recommend each of you checks your mailbox in about a week. You might be summoned to a meeting with some props. But regardless, the video from TVO's The Agenda on gender.
The pronouns of their choosing. Joining us now to better understand the issue and debate what's at stake. In Vancouver, British Columbia, Sarah Meyer, transgender pundit and YouTuber. In the nation's capital, Kyle Kirkup, professor of law at the University of Ottawa. And here in studio, the aforementioned Jordan Peterson, professor of psychology, University of Toronto. Nicholas Matt, lecturer, transgender studies at U of T. And Mary Grove, whose article entitled Growing Up Trends is featured in the October issue of the Walrus magazine. Good to have you three here and our two friends.
There have been multiple reported instances of trans people killing themselves because they are not being integrated into society.
If it wasn't for this law, then I ask you to refer me with they-them pronouns, would you?
I have the authority to determine whether or not an individual is worthy of...
Why did you post those views to YouTube in the first place?
Well, there's proximate and distal reasons. The proximate reasons was because I received some correspondence from clients of mine who have been, I would say, persecuted in a variety of ways by people who were
Take it. If they decide that you have to, will you?
no way, not a chance.
And what's the other, you referred to persecution that friends or clients of yours have experienced?
Yeah, well, there are lots of places now where the workplace has become, I would say, excessively politicized, and so people who have viewpoints, and this also includes, I would say, fairly radical leftist viewpoints, people don't feel comfortable at all in being able to use the language of their choice, or they have even opinions about a variety of different things. And so, and I've had three clients who I would say...
Not correct that there is such a thing as biological sex. Unpack that for you at great length if you want, but in the interest of time, I won't. So that's a very popular misconception. So essentially, in my transgender studies classes, what we're doing is looking at actual research. And sometimes that will also recognize intersex or trans people or transsexual people, as you mentioned, because sometimes also referred to as gender binary. So anything that fits within a gender binary can work within the cisnormativity. But cisnormativity is basically that everyone assumes that there is male and female, and so very little is actually looked at to understand what's actually the case. And scientists have been doing this for
it's much more complicated than that.
Right, it's not my view, I just know that for over 50 years, scientists have shown that that's not true, and yet our social workers have been able to find a way to address the level of complexity that people actually experience.
Stand by for a second, because I want to let everybody else get it. Mary, how prevalent is transgenderism in our world?
I don't think I can answer that question. I think that I would agree with Nicholas that there is some discrepancy on these numbers, and there is some variance on the numbers. I guess I'm curious as to why we need to put a number on this, because that's come up. I listened to.
You only got $10? You get a brush with that. So, there you go. It has happened. We've shown this at Laurier. There's no, as you know, we can on the doors. So, what, start about this interested a little bit, it's about speaking. Do you folks have any thoughts on what we just saw? And first hand up.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So, actually, earlier you said it, we kind of contrasted us to the social justice movements, and on the bottom there it said free, when it was going on, it said free speech for social justice. And I think, especially for this club, we shouldn't cede that territory, because one of the reasons these conversations are important is because we are actually talking about making society more just. And free speech is the characteristic of a just society, and it can be more a higher level, like not letting people sanction you just because their feelings are hurt, is making a just society. And so I don't think we should cede that territory by saying it's us for social justice. We are here, we are engaging in promoting social justice.
Exactly. Actually, I want to make it clear. Our club is not political. Now, the people in this room might have certain political leanings, and there might be more of one side than the other. But obviously, even if you're on the far left, if you're on the far right, if you're somewhere in the middle, your opinion is important, and we want people to have the ability to say it, right? That's the whole point. We want people to be able to make arguments for either side. So thank you, thank you for that point. That is important to notice. Comment?
Yeah, so I want to bring up, how Deborah McClatchy, the president of Laurier, she characterized this whole situation as and not characteristic of the university or education as a whole. So what I want to do is encourage people to read this guidebook from the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario called Social Justice Begins With Me, which they intend to use as part of the curriculum from grade 1 through 8. Now, in the guidebook, they cite two people, Howell Freer and Hero Shore, as part of their underlying assumptions of this guidebook and the whole organization. And they say teaching is not apolitical, and they should be viewed with, they should be criticizing the social order and have the vision to see a new social order. Now, these two people, Howell Freer and Hero Shore, they're proponents of critical theory, which, if I'm being euphemistic, they're not euphemistic. I would say these people are thinly veiled Marxists, which is what critical theory is. It brings this whole dichotomy of oppressor and oppressed into whatever sort of thing you want to look at. And yet here the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario, which describes itself as a social justice union, by the way, they're using these two Marxists and reciting them. So I encourage people to read that. I read it, and it's, in my estimation, that guidebook is just political propaganda.
Thank you.
Can I just stop you there? And can you just bring up that or a link to it on the computer so I can get the title and citations?
The link to the teacher's document?
If you look up
Peterson, people he's talking to, he's someone to like Nicholas Matt. I can unpack that for you, but I won't. The fact is, he can't. And until there is somebody on the, if we're going to be quick, to be concise, we'll call it the homo side, postmodernist side, until there is a postmodernist equivalent of Jordan Peterson who can unpack that for us in a way that's detailed and easy to understand, this debate is just going to go nowhere. Just keep spinning our tires. That's my concern.
On your point, I don't think that'll ever happen. I mean this from a fundamental standpoint. You're not playing on the same field. You know what I mean? Like, how do you reason with someone who thinks reason and evidence don't matter, right? How do you have that collision whenever it's so fundamentally a different way of looking at things? If you're looking at hierarchy and power as the only ways the universe is structured, and it's not by reason and evidence and things like this, it's a real problem, right? And that's why they don't want to have that. How do you engage with pure reason when you don't have that tool?
How do they don't have the tool? They hate it.
Yeah. But I think it would be good to see that. I would agree. It would be good to see the champion of postmodernism taken down a peg. I think that would help. Yeah.
Person there at the back in the black.
Yep. Well, I would say you do so by making an explicit distinction between things like your emotional attachment to a topic and the actual fundamental issue. So in this particular case, I saw that there was two specific logical extremes, and both of them are presented. One was the social extreme, and that was presented through racism. So the woman was talking about how you could say certain words, but they weren't legislated, and society just sort of came to a consensus over time where these words are negative. So if one of us was to say one of these words right now, everyone else would sort of collectively look down on that person, but there wouldn't be a legal ramification. The other one is the legislative extreme, and that's what we're talking about in the context of this discussion. So the difference between those two things is when you have law can be used as a precedent in the future. So if we talk about an infringement on freedom of speech, it's legally you can't actually infringe on somebody's freedom of speech, because then a bill of that nature could be used to justify a bill completely unrelated to transgender issues that further infringes on freedoms. So if you were to exclude the actual transgender issue from the idea of freedom of speech, then you find more people even in that camp on your side. But you have to make that exclusion, otherwise there's an emotional attachment and people can't really see past that. You get this.
Over there.
I have a couple thoughts. First, I'm just going to say what the gentleman in the red sweater said there is I agree with that quite strongly. But the reason I believe we will never get kind of a postmodernist response to Jordan Peterson is that Jordan Peterson argues from the side of rationality and reason. Not to say that he's a beacon of pure reason, right? But he's a guy who positively speaks the truth. Or if you're going by one of his 12 rules, at least he doesn't lie, right? Whereas postmodernism, they're kind of like these left activists are heavily like, they're drunk on bad readings of Foucault and Baudrillard, right? Like, they get their copies of Derrida, maybe scan a couple pages, oh yeah, I'm really on this activism now, right guys? But I think it was best explained, but I don't know if Dr. Haskell's in the house, but from the textbook he shared, oh, how's it going? But anyway, there was a page he shared which was quite insightful into the ideology, where it says the idea that objectivity is best reached only through rational thought is a specifically Western and masculine way of thinking, and it's one that we challenge throughout this textbook. And I thought that was a big insight into how they kind of think. And even then there's a big famous poem by the feminist poet Audre Lorde, where she talks about our white forefathers taught us, I think, therefore I am. The black mother in all of us tells us, I feel, therefore I'm free. Where they kind of cast objectivity aside as an afterthought, whereas Jordan Peterson tries to discern the truth as best he can. So that's kind of my first point, as you know, we'll never see a postmodernist response to it. My second key thought from the video was that I think Professor Genderbender really needs to sort himself out.
Thank you for that. Right here.
Yeah, I just, as to part of the concerns as to, how, academia keeps churning out. Like, the point that Peterson made, he says that, there are certain departments that churn out a level of, activist warriors who fight for their side. Just a bit of the anecdote. I'm wondering, it's like, I'm in computer science, right? I never see this stuff here. I just live and, suffer as a, and I'm wondering, as an institution, why there, I'd ask the crowd why there are so many, dynamics that, Peterson will probably not bring up, the other departments here. He'll make reference mostly to women's studies or, whatever, it's what transgender studies, is that what you get part of it? Okay, whatever. So I'm wondering, is it really the institution itself, or is it a certain facets of the institution that really churn out these people, right? That these people who who will argue, because when I was in high school and I was in grade 12 and everyone was to go and do what they wanted to do in university, they, no one that I knew believed these things, and when I see them again after I'm in 30 now, so when I see them again later, they come and they tell me about these things and that haven't been fed before and I haven't heard it later, so I'm wondering what is really the real threat here? Is it the institution of academia as a whole, or is it certain facets of academia that is really the problem here? Because I think the root is really within the, you know.
Yeah, that's a good question. Would one of our professors actually want to answer that? Or
You got to defend the institution somehow.
Boy, good thing we have tenure, except one of us doesn't. So, Josh's question, it's an interesting question. And is it the fault of the, so I'll boil it down, is it the fault of the university that we've got some trashy scholarship and professors who maybe aren't pulling their weight, or is it the fault of particular departments? Is that a good way to summarize it?
I don't hear any of this.
So it's both in tandem, right? I mean, if the university were to take a stronger stand and say that it wants to make sure that all departments really rely on the best scholarship and the best methodology, then that's going to make a difference. And then that would trickle down to the departments. Then the departments would have to say, you know what, we're not just going to have an incestuous relationship with publishers, and we're actually going to insist that our scholars reach out to journals that are not their cadre of buddies, and if they don't get published, they don't get to stay on. But right now, there are a lot of problems, and another problem is everybody in this room. If you don't stand up when you've got a professor talking nonsense or challenging them, then they'll keep at it. If you don't think you're getting both sides of the argument, then ask for it. You don't have to be disagreeable to disagree, but you should start disagreeing, because the solution starts with you. So that's really the three tiers for the solution.
Thank you. Let me jump in there. So a university is, professors Professor McNally from the School of Business. So unlike Josh, I live and I suffer. And I'm an economist, so I don't know anything about this stuff, and I see very little of it. But I'll tell you, faculty members are like independent subcontractors, and we have a lot of independence, and departments have a lot of independence, and the university really doesn't have a lot of authority to control what's going on, and thank God it doesn't have a lot of control. So it really does come down to us as colleagues and students to get involved and share information and to demand better quality thinking.
So Laurier is currently working on a statement for freedom of expression, right? And it's going to be an open report, and it's going to be done in March. But the hierarchy of the policy actually matters, because let's say that Laurier had a statement and they said, we support maximum freedom of expression. And let's say I showed this video, the 5-minute clip I showed, while we had this policy in place. Okay, but we still have a gendered and sexual violence policy, which is what I violated. So which comes first? So the censorship can actually come from somewhere where you might not expect it. So you could say you support maximum freedom of expression, but how much does that policy actually matter when it comes to other ones? Right? So we actually need to look at where is the censorship coming from.
Right there, black shirt.
This is sort of in response to the question from your thing about whether it's faculties or entire universities that are responsible. And also going on your point with Dr. Lassen about it being sort of related to critical theory. I mean, if you actually examine how it works, like you'll see that it's, I think the blame, I mean, sure, the university can police its faculty to a certain extent, but I think, I mean, largely most of us, I think, would agree that, you know, academic freedom stems from the freedom of departments to define their own research. And freedom, to have the freedom from universities directing their research. The problem happens is what we define as good research. Because all of these fields like gender studies and critical race theory and all like that, they're like less than, what, 60 years old? I mean, they all came about at the same time, post-World War II, 1968, you know, with lots of intellectuals from Germany mainly coming over to the United States and establishing schools. So they established their own disciplines, which means that they established their own journals, which means that they established their own consensus, which means that they established their own entire academic discipline, which can exist entirely independently of any sort of established fact. And when a government then decides to make policy, for example, about gender discrimination, right? They'll go to the people who market themselves as people who study gender studies, which are in actuality, you know, these particular ideologues of a certain 20th century ideology that I think most people have a large issue with. So I think the issue isn't with any sort of university policy or any professor's policy at all. It's with the fact that these fields of study are just like rotten to the core. Like basically there's nothing to salvage here, in my opinion.
Or there. Yeah. My name is Ian. I have 2 points, if you don't mind. The first one is I actually had a chance to talk to a few of my professors about like their thoughts on Peterson's decision not to do the pronouns. Most of them were pretty against it, which is fine. They're totally entitled to use whatever they wish. However, I do think it's important to note that someone needs to oppose what Nicholas Mack was saying. I assume that they don't think that there's no such thing as biological sex. So even if they disagree with Peterson's decision on the pronoun issue, to think that it's not necessary for someone to speak against that is a little bit alarming. And then that kind of leads me to the second point, that there does seem to be quite a trend in, as other people have noted, women's or gender studies, the whole nature-nurture debate, that we want to totally cut out any insights from evolutionary biology, say that any differences between male and female are solely as a result of biosocial conditioning, and that's why we're having different outcomes, because some groups are getting biased social conditioning.
Thank you.
Over there in the black.
I'm Gabe. I'm a little bit confused here because, so what we just saw, I mean, it was a debate. It shows both sides of the story. So, it didn't favor a particular side, so, I still get why that's controversial. Like, why did Lindsay get in trouble for that?
Lindsay, you want to take it?
Well, you can't be neutral when it comes to this because they have an agenda they want to push. And it's the Nicholas Mack kind of agenda, not the Jordan Peterson one. It really comes down to that.
That's huge, right? They won't let Jordan Peterson say what he wants.
Well, I don't think they put in an effort to understand him. And I must admit, neither did I. And when I first played this was the first video I'd ever seen of him. And I just liked the way he was articulate, and I liked the way he stated his position. And so I showed it. And but even I was convinced that this was someone, like a little bit touchy, like, you know, we should be a little bit afraid. And now, I don't think that way at all.
Girl in the white, right there.
My name is Kristen. I would just like to say that as somebody who has taken genetics here at Laurier, as far as we were taught, there are 2 biological sexes, male and female. There's an X and a Y chromosome. So to go against what the Nicholas from UFG was saying, as far as what we were taught here at Laurier in biology, there are 2 biological sexes. So.
Thank God.
I think one of the important things to understand about the whole debate, kind of touched on a few issues with having postmodernist scholars of Jordan Peterson's kind of caliber, or why people are so okay with non-platforming people that they disagree with. is kind of the inherent postmodern power games that are going on. And it's kind of important to realize that there's very little other than power to the people that are arguing for this side, because they see the world strictly through the lens of power and oppressor and oppressed. So you kind of come across a group of people that are very okay oppressing other people if it feels like it will lead to the greatest utilitarian good for social good that they see. And that's where it kind of comes across where a lot of people say, aren't you okay, like shouldn't they be okay for freedom of speech if it's not just allowing our opinion, but it's allowing theirs. But it's kind of taking, it's not taking the right view from the underlying ideology behind the people that are making these arguments, because it inevitably comes down to, if there is nothing else in society other than people who are making the rules and people who have to follow the rules, there is nothing other to be than the person who's making the rules. So that's where they have to strive for automatically.
Yeah, can I jump in there? What's your name?
Josh.
Josh. So do you think that's what makes it so enticing in terms of adopting that sort of perspective? Because, I mean, it was likely illustrated in the video, especially transgender. That population is not massive at all.
Oh,
but it has an entire room of people discussing it now, right?
Right.
Like it becomes an issue. So do you think it's like the power dynamic that makes that perspective?
I think that's definitely part of it. A group of people that feel like they're disenfranchised for, I think, varying reasons. One of those might be the size of the comparable group that they identify as. Especially since you have to notice the language that they used throughout the interview was, when they say things like denying them their rights and denying them their humanity, no one was denying them their humanity, but you have to take special consideration of the fact that they use that term. They're using their identity as whether transgender or gender fluid or genderqueer or any of these things, they're using that identity as a marker of their humanity. And so when they say that I'm a transgender person, and that's my identity, if you deny any of my requests about identifying me as in that way, you're denying me my humanity and my rights. That's because they are tying themselves intrinsically with their identity in this single group. So I think that's a big part of it, that they're seeing themselves first and foremost as a member of this group, and because the group itself is so inherently small and, you know, you can make the argument that people are oppressed based on the size of their group that they're affiliated with, but you can make the argument that anybody is oppressed in any number of hundreds of ways, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you can control these certain ways that people formulate speech, or that you can take away other people's fundamental rights to be able to express themselves.
Kind of great.
So my name is Thomas. I think there's two things that they're really getting at. The first one is that they kind of use this discussion of trans rights as their discrimination. They use it as a jumping off point, but the real thing is that they don't want their own ideas to be broken down and discussed. And especially like when we were discussing the debate in Lindsay's tutorial, after that in the meeting, Dr. Ramkon said, first-year students don't have the capacity to break something like this down. They need to be indoctrinated for 4 years before they can break this down. But they're using this kind of discrimination point with trans people to kind of push their agenda of not letting young students kind of have that freedom of discussion and break down ideas and formulate their own opinions. And I think that's the real problem, that yeah, there is this whole talk about trans rights and discrimination, but the underlying fact is the freedom of speech and freedom to break down and formulate your own opinions.
Let's have about maybe 10 more minutes of discussion going on. Return to you guys there. So, right on the right.
There we are. Okay, well, first things first, actually, this sweater may appear to you guys to be red, but it identifies as maroon. That's right, right?
Anyway, one thing I want to kind of bring my optimism in here to counteract the overall gloomy cast in the room. And I'll tell you this, I just want to ask first of all, who here is currently involved in school either as a professor or a student? Just raise your hand. Yeah, so it's going to be most people. I'll tell you that I've been out for about a year now, and I can say that once you get out into like the real operating world, these ideas, these postmodernist ideas, normal people hear them and they can only react with bewilderment because it just makes no sense. When someone tells you, you tell the average person there's no biological gender, they're going to look at you weird because they know how absurd that is. But if I'll engage in some real politics right now. Postmodernist fleeing debate is fine for us because it only leaves our side on the table. And especially when they whip up a huge frenzy, they come onto a nationally broadcast, well, at least provincially broadcasted program, and then flee from the debate. Well, then that's just our rational ideas left out there, and our rational ideas are explained openly in a way that people can understand. So I honestly think that's a good thing. But in terms of, because there definitely are still threats though. And one thing that I think we call it the free speech or the rational side, can use is legalism. Because that's what they're using against us. And if you guys ever get called in front of a tribunal, try and stay as cool as Lindsay, but when they come up to you with, oh, you broke this policy, ask them what subsection, ask them what paragraph, ask them to use the specific language to illustrate your violation. Because probably 9 times out of 10, you're going to find they'll just, and then you got them. That's your gotcha. The last thing that I got to say, though, is that it's really important that we get our ideas out there. And the biggest thing that you can do with that is in discussion with your friends, discussion with your coworkers, and just you can go, hey, did you hear about this thing? And kind of a gift that was given to us down from the South, leaving aside everyone's opinions on Trump, but really that guy is he's like a brick through our nice orderly window, and it's one that, his whole anti-PC thing, all of the controversy that surrounds him and every little thing he does, it's a great way to say, oh man, did you hear about this? And then you can segue into talking about our ideas, opposition to, I'll wrap up really quick here, but our opposition to the postmodern side. And the big reason we have to do this though is, I hope people here are familiar with the concept of rent-seeking in economics, but what the postmodernists are engaging in is intellectual rent-seeking. They're just trying to create an environment where our ideas can't ever be expressed and therefore die out, so that theirs can flourish, like a dishonestly competitive business would do.
Thank you for that. Guy in the black and red hat.
So, my name's John. I would like to know if you agree and have you think about it if you don't have an answer right away. But Jordan Peterson seems to think that this will eventually lead to totalitarian communism. Do you agree? Do you think that's where this is going?
Where they want to go.
Well, actually, it's like this. Who thinks this can lead to totalitarianism in society?
So these policies over time can lead to some sort of totalitarian control.
There you go.
All right.
So you're kind of free,
Well, this difference you can and will. It's impossible to happen, is it? There has to be a million other things that go wrong.
But what this guy was saying, sorry, I don't even know with the dark glasses, with this social justice begins with B, that's how it begins, because you're starting to teach first graders who are 6 years old. You are telling them, whatever you tell them, they will accept as the godly truth and never question it. They're 6 years old. So you're in a position of authority over these children, and for 8 years, which is probably going to be extended to high school too, you're teaching them social justice, which is code for critical theory and Marxism, as you were saying. So yes, in 2 generations of this kind of education, and you can only imagine the next generation will be worse. Starting with Pierre Trudeau, it already started with this, and now we see this, and now we're going to see worse and worse and worse. Yes, we will get there.
But there's a reason too why this has just started to explode on campuses in the past couple of years. right? This has been ramping up slowly.
Right, yeah, exactly. The
It's
previous
not
generation that just
nowhere.
came out of school did have a lighter version of this, and now it's going to be, you know, this.
Will
and
they
who knows what
unlock
comes after.
capitalism? You know, will it lead to full-blown
It's
Marxism?
social Marxism at the very least.
Yeah,
where,
I
like, truth doesn't matter. It's relativism everywhere. Like that's.
It's hard to.
And this is a big debate, and I think we should definitely do pub nights with the Nelson. I think that'd be very fun. Is there anyone still who hasn't made remarks? We got a few more minutes, so come over there.
I just wanted to remark about how there seems to be a lack of agency or a lack of self-determination within certain identity groups, and things like BLM. I mean, I grew up looking at apartheid as one of the last great victories of the left. It was something that was worthy of activism, and there was of what people, like I've experienced things that, you know, weren't pleasant, but, you know, I kind of use them as a means to, as escape velocity from it, you know, not as something to posture with, and that's all.
And I guess for our last point, the gentleman over there.
My name is Rick. I have a slightly different question to the one. And maybe Lindsay also can address this because I know we have a class, and I have to go by what the university finding was that there was nothing wrong that was done at the time. However, even at the beginning of the video that was shown, one of the speakers started talking about the different trans identities. There was some laughter mixed in this audience took place. I'm not a trans person yet. I felt uncomfortable at that. I felt like uncomfortable at that moment. Now, my question is, if the same thing happens in a class, or in your class, Lindsay in particular, or any other with the same topics, is it possible that the person might feel intimidated or even offended? And how do we deal with it?
Lindsay, you want to take it?
Yeah, do you mean you felt uncomfortable with people in here?
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Do you mean you felt uncomfortable when people in here laughed at the remarks?
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I would be in agreement that I think there's too much moral panic about she, your pronouns because, I mean, look, I'm in a graduate program in the arts at a university in Canada. That's the place where you'd be probably most likely to meet someone who uses those pronouns, right? Aside from an LGBTQ collective, but I mean, those are in the universities. So I think when people freak out about having to use she and jur, it's going too far because, you know, I've never met anyone who uses those. I've actually never ever come across someone who uses those. I've never even seen it in a social media bio or anything. The most I've ever come across is they or them. So I do think it's overblown, and I think maybe that's the cause of the laughter, is that it is a little bit, it's just something we can't really envisage right now because we haven't come across it. I don't know how many people in here have ever come across someone who uses she or jur.
I'm not talking about the pronouns in particular, I'm talking about the reaction. That might offend certain people.
I was laughing, and explain why. Like, what is gender blender? What on earth is it? That's where I laughed. I've been following this madness for years and I've never heard that one, and that was hilarious because he told me that.
If I make it like that, people would feel uncomfortable.
Is there anybody here that causes gender blunder? Like, come on.
Let's address the point though, because but I will say to you directly that I understand people's discomfort. I've been in situations when I was in school where people would say things casually denigrating stuff that I felt very strongly about. And the fact is, it comes down to just individual strength of character. And the fact is, when you're made to feel uncomfortable and someone says something that you really disagree with, you have to take that time to stand up and actually advocate your point. And I strongly believe, especially in an academic environment, that's always within the reach of people to do. But some people are more vulnerable.
Well, anyway, I think I'll finish it off just because of time. I don't want to keep you guys in here forever. That being said, we're going to stop doing this big debate, but you're more than welcome to gather in groups and talk about whatever you want. That being said, obviously we ask people to be respectful in this club. But at the same time, you come here, you should expect to hear things that you're not comfortable with. And I think, yes, some people will have different reactions. Is it appropriate or not? Well, either way it happens, and I think we should be ready for that. But that being said, thank you so much for coming, folks. It was nice to have you here for our first event. Thank you. So we're looking forward to seeing all of you again at our future events, and mark my words, there will be future events. As for today, don't forget to sign our wonderful membership form.